Alright guys, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the Kybalion and the ancient philosophy of Hermeticism. So, to get us started here, who was Hermes Trismegistus? Hermes Trismegistus is a syncretism of some of these characters that existed across the period of 300 BCE to 300 CE. And he's supposed to be composed of a lot of mythical writers, mythical speakers, people who were very advanced in the arts of alchemy, theology, and astrology. And so Hermes Trismegistus became this character that encapsulated all of the bodies of knowledge in that area. They call him Trismegistus because the triplicity is essential in many of the Hermetic teachings. So, the big players in Hermes Trismegistus are Thoth, the god of knowledge, the bird guy. Hermes, the actual Greek messenger who goes between worlds. And I don't know where the third guy came from, but I guess it's just them. And so that's basically where the Kybalion derives its philosophical groundwork from. Alright, point number one in the Kybalion is the Law of Mentalism. The universe is mind, all is mind, and all that is mind. This points back to, in Christian theology, the first words of John, where he talks about, in the beginning there was the Word. But more particularly, the way that this philosophical principle stands is in the idea that before anything comes into the material manifestation, it originates, it starts as this idea, this realm of where I believe Kant separated things into the noumena and the phenomena. So the realm of the noumena, the realm of these ideas, the many, and then the actual phenomena, the experience of it. Many crossovers across a lot of traditions, but the Kybalion sums it up by saying everything is mental. Where this comes into a more practical sense, you could look at your identity. Many people's identity is derived from either positive and optimistic thought loops or negative and detrimental thought loops. When one person hears a compliment, another person can hear an insult. Take, for example, your height or your size. It's great to be called a big guy at the gym, but it might not be great to be called a big guy at a buffet or maybe a dining hall where there's limited food. There's the one thing about Lao Tzu dreaming if he's a butterfly or if the butterfly is dreaming that he's Lao Tzu. So there's a lot of philosophy centered around creation emerging from this realm of the mental. And so that's why in many cosmological systems you see the material realm as impure. You see the material realm as this fallen place. In Gnosticism, the demiurge is the ruler and the master of this kind of corrupt material existence. And So in many other cosmological systems, the material is the lowest form, whereas the mind is the highest form. And so the major principle of mentalism here talks about the fact that everything that you see around you must have begun somewhere, and that somewhere is a mind. And if you want to wrap this all the way back around to the beginning, you could say that, the Big Bang was just an idea in God's mind, or in the universal fluctuation cosmological principle. You could say, in the loose sense of the word, that a mind was what created that spark. And so that's the point that Hermeticism is trying to make here. And this is why it's very important to have a very orderly, structured, consistent internal schema, so that you don't get a lot of these stray thoughts turning into reality. You don't get bad thoughts turning into bad action. That's why central to Buddhism is the 8 spokes of the wheel. They talk about right action, right virtue, and there's 8 different kinds of righteous parts of that. So the first law simply states that all is mental, all is mind. What begins as a thought will manifest downstream in reality. So that was point number 1. The second point, the second law of Hermeticism is as above, so below. Now that might have a negative connotation to some of the well-studied occult gurus out there who know about Baphomet. Ooh, spooky. Baphomet. And the as above, so below. The solve e congeale. The dissolve and congeal. But it's really not that scary. It's really not that, far out there. The idea is that the macrocosm reflects the microcosm, and the microcosm reflects the macrocosm. A very simple thing to visualize this is a seed in a tree. So the seed contains the blueprint for the entire tree's code. And the tree as well contains the entire blueprint for the fruit that produces the seed to create itself. They say, which one came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, a Hermeticist, someone who practices the laws of the Kybalion, would say that it actually begun as an idea first, the Law of Mentalism. But then they would say they both brought each other into existence with the as above, so below principle. But you can see this play out in a lot of different kind of geometrical fractals, a lot of different principles of math and science. They apply not only on the microscopic scale, but also on the macroscopic scale. You look at the picture of neuron activity, and you look at the energy that flows through a computer circuit, and you can look at all sorts of different cosmological galaxy formation in the way that your brain is structured. So, as above, so below, we can get more into how that is used in the practical sense, and why the Satanists and Venus worshippers, the Luciferians, why they so tightly cling to that belief. But it primarily stems from the ability to create material effects with pure mind and thought form. So basically like propaganda, brainwashing, like convincing people of a certain anti-natalist agenda, and then suddenly the birth rates are less than replacement. I wonder how that happens. But to sum that up, point number 2 is as above, so below. And that just means that Whatever comes up must come down, and whatever goes down must come up. All right, point number 3 is the law of vibration. So the law of vibration states that everything stays in motion, nothing rests, nothing is absolutely fixed. We can see a great parallel to this with the idea that the only thing that's guaranteed is that there are no guarantees in life, except maybe death and taxes. And I hope you filed your taxes. It's almost tax day. But so yeah, the principle of vibration. And we can see this on, if you really get into particle physics, at the forefront of that science, we can see that a lot of interactions deal with that Higgs field and the whole process of radiation. So the way black hole decay works with the particles and antiparticles coming into existence at the same time and then not annihilating each other because one gets pulled in the opposite direction from that circle where it doesn't leave the escape radius. Whatever, I'll put a picture up so you can understand that. But everything moves, everything vibrates, nothing stays still. That's the principle of vibration. Relativistically, you could obviously say that, oh, I'm standing still, but then I would urge you to point to anything around you that seems to also be standing still. You could find at least one object in your frame of reference that is also moving. It all turns down to perspective at the end of the day. But the second kind of half of the principle of vibration is that things that are higher vibration are more akin to the mentalist plane, the spirit, the idea plane, the realm of the noumena or the implicit order, depending on which flavor of philosophy you like. And the things that correspond in a lower frequency are the more solid things, the more materialistic things, things that you can touch and feel and see and sense. And if you need a direct parallel of this, you can look at ice cubes, okay? The faster something vibrates, and that's something in our case being H2O, the faster that H2O vibrates, it could either be a solid with ice when it being slow, it can be a liquid at room temperature, or it could be a gas if you heat it up. So it really depends on your vibration with what you see manifesting before you in the material world. So that was point number 3. All right, point number 4 is the principle of polarity. So the principle of polarity states that opposites are identical. They only vary in degree. So I talked about the horseshoe concept earlier, where, you know, the balance in the center is really the only stable point. The people who are very pro one thing are very against the exact opposite of that nature. The principle of polarity states that applies across the board to everything. So if there's an up, there's a down. If there's a left, there's a right. If there's a forward, then there's a back. And the degree to which you move in any of those angles corresponds to a similar translation in whatever opposite is. So if I add 10, I can now take away 10 to get back to the original. You can see this in things like coordinate systems and computer graphics. That's how a lot of computer graphics are designed, is with that kind of implementation, that you can undo any transform, you can put any piece of a UI anywhere, and it all stacks up and overlays. So the principle of polarity, we can get a little bit more intimate with our explanation here. you'll find that when you get into meditation that attachment is the root of all suffering. Buddha might have been pretty on point when he said that, okay? But attachment, whether positive or negative, let's look at it like this. Attachment can vary in degree. So if you're highly attached to something, you either really love it or you really hate it. The attachment is what's driving the closeness. And the degree, whether it's hot or cold, whether it's love or hate, that's really whatever, it's arbitrary to the point that you're highly attached to whatever you say that you love or that you hate. And so this is why it's very important to guard yourself from things that you truly hate. You ought to be apathetic towards them. True hate consists in a cold apathy. That's why Cocytus, that's why in Dante's Inferno, Dante Alighieri, the Divine Comedy, puts Satan upside down, number one, upside down, and number two, in Cocytus, which is this frozen lake of suffering, and it's so far away from God that it's frozen. It's frozen hell. And so that gets back at the point that it's not just that you could be tortured and be miserable actively, but true suffering consists in that relinquishment, or that being attached and then having that ripped away from you. So the point I'm trying to make is that polarity is baked into pretty much everything in life if you look deep enough. And the goal is to find balance, to find centeredness. And that's why Buddhism is all about relinquishing attachment, finding that middle path. And that's why meditation is all about stilling the mind so it doesn't fall down into any of those slopes. Or at least it finds a balance between the opposites that can't cancel each other out. Point number 5 is the principle of rhythm. So everything flows in and out. Everything that swings forward must swing back. For every cause there is an effect, and for every effect there is a cause. We can see this in Newton's laws of physics, the laws of motion. For every force there's an equal and opposite reaction. And we can see this manifest across many other aspects of life. The principle of rhythm is that when you swing forward, you swing back. Think about, I'll give you a practical example for the gym, for building muscles. The swing forward would be the time you put in at the gym, lifting the weights, moving around, the time you spend learning a yoga pose. The swing back is the recovery. It's the time that your body absorbs that, internalizes it, synthesizes information, really compounds it into that long-term storage. So, like everything in life, rhythm is a very balanced dance. One common trend you'll notice across all of these principles is that they all tend towards balance. Think about a well-balanced instrument like a piano or a guitar. When they're in tune, their notes are much better, they're much more rhythmic, they're much more entrancing than something that you would say is out of tune. It doesn't flow with a nice rhythm. It doesn't have that principle of rhythm balanced within it. You can see it mimicked in the body as well. A lot of biological processes have similar effects. So the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, they play on each other. So when you're out and you're hunting and you're going and exploring, your nervous system wires up, it fires forward. And then there's the rest and digest. After you've gone out and gathered and explored, you're in that recovery period. There's a very interesting graph about levels of optimal arousal. And not just that kind of arousal, but It does apply there as well. But so for task engagement, if you're trying to create an engaging task, there needs to be an appropriate level of difficulty and an appropriate level of engagement. So the way that you get there is not by just information dumping everything and just saying, okay, because the task complexity is too high for it to be optimally engaging. You need to scaffold. You need to meet the learner at their needs. You know, they say when a student is ready, the master appears. You could also say, when the master is ready, the students appear. That's the principle of rhythm in action there. So that was point number 5, the principle of rhythm. Point number 6 is the law of cause and effect. Now, we touched on this a little bit with the law of polarity and the law of rhythm, but the main point that the law of cause and effect touches on is that nothing is chance. What you think is chance is just a law that we haven't discovered yet. Now, this one is what our rationalist, materialist, science friends in the pure materialistic philosophical landscape would like to purport. The agnostics, they like to get their hands in this and say, oh, that's so wise, that's so deep. Like with everything, there's a balance, okay? But there is a great wisdom in the fact that you can measure anything. It comes down to a series of interactions. Even probability itself is what they want to call quantum fluctuations in the Higgs field, and that random chance emerges as a function of some hidden variable system that we just don't know yet. And so this is what the law of cause and effect is getting at. It's telling us that there are hidden variables, and just because we don't know the whole system yet doesn't mean that we can't zoom in a little bit more, or maybe zoom out and see an emergent property. It states that there is no such thing as chance, or more accurately, we could say that chance is derived from factors that we just can't know yet. And I like that kind of skeptic philosophy because it does balance out. It provides a nice contrast to the people who claim absolute certainty in reality, or absolute certainty in the way that certain physical mechanical systems exist. Here's a crossover to Taoism, or Taoism. Sorry, I'm a Westerner. They say, point to anybody who knows what reality is, and I'll show you somebody who doesn't know anything about reality. It's those who know do not speak, and those who speak do not know. That's a pretty famous saying as well. But the point there is that there's so much baked into our existence that it's, you could chalk it up to chance, but if you find the thread deep enough, you'll realize that nothing was actually left to chance. This is what intelligent design is supposed to get at as well. But we'll wrap it up there. That was point number 6, the law of cause and effect. All right, and our final point here is point number 7, and it is the principle of gender. Now, before you start thinking that we're talking about that, I'm going to make it pretty clear. Gender is derived from the word generation, and the whole purpose of gender is for the process of creation, or generation. And the way that that's most apparent is through that male-female physical split, right? It takes a man and a woman. I don't know if that's controversial to say yet, but it takes a man and a woman to create a child, to generate a new human, right? But the principle of gender goes beyond just reproduction, okay? The principle of gender goes in the realm of ideation. So the masculine is the will, and this is why languages have different pronouns, gendered pronouns and gendered words. It's because it goes back to the way the words themselves, the etymologies were derived. But the main point being that the masculine impulse needs an equal and opposite feminine impulse to receive it. You know, you can't drink water if you don't have a glass and the water. The masculine principle would be the rigid vase, the rigid structure, the rigid cup. But the receptive, the feminine nature, would be the actual water that populates and that swells to fill that container. And that's what is in a lot of Christian tradition. The Holy Spirit comes in that female gendered landscape, although it is part of the Father. We're going to get off into Trinitarianism and stuff like that, but the point being that the process of generation requires both ends of that dichotomy, both ends of that pole. It requires that synthesis of opposites to create and produce something new. And so that's what the law, the final law, number 7, the number for completion, talks about. The principle of gender. All right. So we've gone through the 7 laws of the Kybalion. I'm going to talk a little bit about practical usage of this philosophical system. So the key trend that we saw emerge from pretty much all of the points is that balance is key. You might find a lot of parallels among current tradition and Abrahamic faiths and Western tradition, where, you know, we're cast into this lower plane. So everything was good in the beginning with the Garden of Eden. Everything was as it should have been in God's mind. And then man entered the picture and started messing everything up with sin and such, with the serpent from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In the further breakdown of that dichotomy into good and evil and up and down and obedience and disobedience, a lot of tradition takes many elements from the Kybalion. So one of the greatest benefits you can expect from practicing, or at least being aware of these laws of nature, you could call them, is that when you're looking for something, you're much more likely to find it. Okay? And so if you know that when bad things happen, that's just the backward swing of the pendulum, you know that good things of equal and maybe even greater value will come on the forward swing, so long as you endure and don't try to stop the pendulum. You got to realize the laws of nature are made in such a way to make life engaging and fun and worth living. So you can even find that in proof of the times where you think that life isn't worth living. That's just more fuel for, more ammunition for proving to yourself how much more it is worth living. Another practical benefit of knowing about the Kybalion is that when you have an idea and you want to bring it into being, you're much more equipped to know how to do that. So, one of the more practical ways you'll find yourself using the knowledge you've acquired about the Kybalion is that it gives you a toolkit to discern how close you are to God, or to, you could say, your purpose or your mission, or to the way, the Tao. Now that's a pretty grand claim, but I'll back it up with the fact that the more you question what you're doing, the less likely it is that you're probably supposed to be doing it. Look at what people call the flow state. So, when you're thoroughly engaged in a task, you're not asking questions about why you're doing it. You just kind of find yourself caught up in what you're doing, and then time flies so fast, and then it's done. I'm going to use one of the laws of the Kybalion here to help me make this point. When you find yourself not in a flow state, you ought to be thinking about why that is. Because at every moment, God gives you an opportunity to see Him. In all of creation, there's the principle of as above, so below. Okay? Even baked into the smallest little creature, there's a little spark of divinity. Even baked into one of the smallest, most fleeting moments of your day. Maybe you see a bird on your way to work. Maybe you see a little bit of sunshine on your window. And maybe you see a rainbow when it's not even raining. I've seen that. It's happened sometimes with the clouds. But when you learn to recognize that little bit of divinity, that little bit of the mind of God at work, the little bit of that simplicity and beauty of nature, you'll reflect on that law of the Kybalion, that, the further away you feel from God, the closer it is and the more opportunity you'll have to come back. That's one of the great stories of the parable of the prodigal son. The parable of the prodigal son is all about that law of the pendulum, the law of rhythm. The further the son went away, the further he went into depravity, into squandering his fortune. The more of a draw he had to come back to the source. The more a draw he had to come back and reconcile with God, or with the Father there in that story. The point being, many traditions have that coming and going. Many traditions have that fall from grace and that return. It all stems back to that principle of rhythm, the principles baked into the Kybalion, in the foundation of many Western traditions. I'll give you another practical insight. If you ever get into some kind of ritual work or magic work, they're going to have a lot of these ideas and a lot of these things baked into how the rituals are performed. So any sort of Crowleyan rituals, or Peter Carroll, any sort of chaos magic work, any sort of, I don't know what New Agers do nowadays, crystal girly magics, they're all just repackaging and rebranding some of these vehicles that the Kybalion points out, and that pointed out 2,000 years ago. So the next time you do your little TikTok girly manifestation ritual, make sure you have a firm footing in the literary tradition that is the Kybalion and Hermes Trismegistus, and it might make your manifestations go a little bit further than just the crystal rock cabinet that you curate. Another very interesting thing is that prayer plays a lot on the Kybalion. So across many traditions, even those who are fundamentally opposed to magic and traditions like that, they still have the Kybalion baked into their whole ritual system of prayer. drawing the line and saying, well, one ritual is bad and another one is good, it's almost as arbitrary as that principle of gender. You know, you don't have to say this is good, this is bad, this one's male, this one's female. It's just one or the other, and it's used to generate an outcome. So the receptivity of God is determined by the force and the will and the desire that you have that's baked into that active principle of prayer. And so once you recognize what prayers get answered and how to pray correctly, how to perform ritual mentalist activities in a way that the mind of God is receptive to, you'll find that a lot of your systems you thought were hit or miss actually end up being much more likely and much more probable. Not to say that it's chance, but that's the whole idea of Feng Shui. So Feng Shui literally is a luck manipulation. And those people just think that it's an architectural thing. It's just interior design. It's literally manipulating the luck. It's manipulating the energy flow of rooms so that an optimal stream, an optimal rhythm can play out. And whether it's Feng Shui just in the physical design of a room, or whether it's Feng Shui in the mental architecture of your neuron activations, the principle applies across the board. The Kybalion, it's pretty much universal in the sense that it does play a role in pretty much everything you can think it does. I'll give you a side tangent here, a little bit of wisdom. The only prayer that you should really ever pray is one where it is a surrender, a full giving up, a full yielding of the identity and the association of what you think you want and what God is prepared to give you. So when you pray to any sort of deity or when you pray to any sort of divine force, make sure it's that intention that thy will be done. Not my will, but thy will. And I'm sure there's a lot of inversions of this with Satanism and with the other one, but that's more like advanced, just beating around the bush. It's really, you're going to get what you're going to get. And that's what the plan is. The whole idea of Venus worship and Luciferianism, stuff like that, is the idea that you can somehow use the material to ascend the spiritual. So this is what Solomon did with building the temple, and this is how, Jesus gave his followers authority over demons. It was so that you can use the material to climb to the spiritual. And the whole Venus worship and Luciferianism is kind of derived on the principle that you can also do the opposite, as above, so below. So if you can use demons to climb the spiritual, you can use the spiritual to compel demons to move the material. And that's what Jesus said. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, or throw itself into the sea, whatever that was. But you'll find that when you reach a certain stage in meditation and theological development, you get past good or evil and you get into the realm of what can and can't happen. And you'll find that God allows a lot of things to happen that may seem good or may seem bad, but it's just because you lack those hidden variables. You lack that perspective. You lack the understanding of the principle of the Kybalion responsible for that nature manifesting in the lowest form. You can trace everything back to an idea, everything. And so just some little tidbit there. So we're going to wrap that up there. The 7 laws of the Kybalion, a little bit of practical tidbit of wisdom there too. If you want to know more, you can always look up the philosophy of Hermeticism. Maybe I can make a video on each of these topics more in depth if that's interesting. Or maybe I can make some content on the practical applications beyond just some little nuggets of wisdom here. But let me know what you think. Like, subscribe, and give me some comments. Thanks.